Hello, Cyril Jankov here again. We're going to be doing week 4, offer and acceptance. I recorded this last Thursday night. Regrettably, I was interstate and it didn't record properly, so I'm just going to do another recording. It'll be the same as Thursday night, except the one with the other people involved, just me. Okay, so let's start. As I've done in the past, I'm going to go through the course materials, and then I'm going to go to the questions at the end. The questions at the end will just basically follow on because we'd have covered the course materials. So basically, offer and acceptance. The first part I really wanted to go through with you here is the first step in any contract is that there must be an offer. Someone in some way must make it known that they want to make a deal, and it's defined as a statement by a party with capacity that they are willing to be bound by the specific terms of the offer. Okay, so we've got bilateral and unilateral offers. A bilateral offer is where I'm happy to be bound by someone else, an individual, a particular individual. A unilateral offer is what's different, where you make it to the world, where anyone can respond, either one person or a number of people. Bilateral offer is where only a particular individual can come back to you. And the main case in the area of unilateral is the Carlisle and Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. You would have heard that. It's a classic case, very important case. And just while we're there, part of the case was talking about intention. The mere fact that they put money in the bank was seen to be intention. Okay. So carrying on. It was also interesting that I remember reading a number of years ago that Mrs. Carlisle's husband was a barrister. So you can imagine that he probably said to her, "I think you've got a good case. Let's go for it." All right, there are a number of specific types of offers distinguished from puffs. Now, a puff is a marketing statement which we say something like, "This is the best coffee in Queensland. This is the best restaurant. This is the best this or that." You know, can you really believe it? And all goes down to what the reasonable person in the street would think about that statement. We'll find out later on that when someone says something which is not true, that's called a misrepresentation. Now, traditionally, these have been very hard to action. And so legislation has been introduced, and it's called misleading deceptive conduct, or what we'll be talking about later on. But just let you know at this stage here, an offer is where the person will be bound. I offer you this house for a certain amount of dollars. If it's accepted, there's a contract as long as all the required formalities are met. But if you say this is the very best coffee in the world, well, that's apart from it's the parties. It's just understood that that's not an offer. All right, continuing from there, there have been a number of cases involved in all this. Offers distinguished from invitations to treat. Now, an invitation to treat is where a person invites someone else to make a treaty, invitation to treat, also known as invitation to negotiate, invitation to start discussing things. Okay, so traditionally there are a number of different areas which are treated as invitations to treat, and you'll see on page 10 of your materials that there's a number of paragraph 3.21 starts with advertisements, then goods on display, and then there's price lists, and then there's tickets and vending machines and auctions, and there are tenders. Let's have a look at those ones. And 3.21 is advertisements. Advertisements are seen to be where I put something in advertisement and I invite you to make an offer to me. And that reminds me of a case with JB Hi-Fi. Didn't go to court, but it was a number of years ago. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. The marketing manager at JB Hi-Fi said to the IT person, look, see this $3,000 flat screen TV. I want you to put 15% off on it. The IT person accidentally put $15 on top. So there's a huge rush of people with $15 in their hand coming in. Now, they quickly spoke to their corporate counsel. Corporate counsel said, look, they're all responding to an invitation to treat. So the people, being the customers, are making an offer, and it's up to JB Hi-Fi to accept or reject. They rejected it. Of course, they got themselves in trouble with the competition regulator, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, for basically claiming false advertising. Now, they didn't get themselves in huge trouble because it was an accident. It wasn't as if you were like, let's take a situation where you might probably recall Coles, maybe 2 years ago. They were saying freshly baked bread. Indeed, it was cooked in Ireland, brought out in a container and reheated in the Coles stores. That is a little bit different from the situation. So again, we'll be talking about those later on. But in essence, if you have an advertisement, and there was a case that Partridge and Crittenden, and goods on display. So if you have goods on display, little Johnny walks in and says, look, I want that bottle of whiskey. Well, the owner of the shop doesn't have to sell it. And indeed, you've got one bottle of whiskey and you've got 10 people walking in. You don't have to sell it to any of those people. It's up to the shopkeeper to accept or reject. So that's another situation of invitation to treat. And there's a number of cases here. We've got Fisher and Bell and Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain and Boots. You really should know these cases. They're just illustrative of the principles I'm giving you. Now, circulation of a price list, and that was the Granger and Goffer case. Basically, that again is an invitation to treat. Ticket machines and vending machines. The key case there is Thornton and Shoe Lane parking. Lord Denning, a well-known judge. I happened to see him when he came out when I was at university. He came out and gave a talk here in Australia. I went to see him, a very eminent man. Now, ticket machines and vending machines. So what is the ticket machine is inviting an offer, and we accept by putting the money into the ticket machine. Next one is auctions. And we've got the case of Smythe and Thomas, which is the Wirraway aircraft. Look, the auctioneer stands there and says, look, ladies and gents, what am I bid for this beautiful house? And they're inviting offers. And that's the usual situation, unless the auctioneer actually states quite clearly, and this is on page 16 of your notes, halfway down. Interestingly, though, the court noted that the advertisement placed by Harding had said, we invite tenders and we will accept the highest bid. Then that would have been a contract. In other words, this would be because they had in that situation made a promise and indicated an intention to be legally bound by the content of that promise. So let's go back. I'm the auctioneer and I invite your offers. Okay, so therefore that's an invitation to treat. But if I promise you to sell you at a certain price, that instead of me inviting offers, I'm making an offer to you. So just be a little bit careful with that one. So that's the distinction between auctions, which is an invitation to treat, and offers there. And that can be seen if you look at it on page 15 and 16 under the heading of 3.25 auctions and 3.26 where they were talking about tenders there. And the case was there, Spencer and Harding. Okay, let's talk about tenders now. What is a tender? A tender is where a buyer wants to get the best price. Another reason for tenders is that you want to show that you're doing things fairly for everyone. So I want to buy, maybe I'm a local council and I want to have some construction work done. And I put the specifications out, and I can either go to the public, which is to everyone, or I can choose a limited group, maybe say 5 or 6 potential construction companies, give them the details, ask them to get back to me. So what am I doing? I'm inviting offers. Okay. Now, we'll be discussing this some other time, but if I tell you these are the rules, I must follow those rules. That's an implied term, and that was in the Hughes aircraft and civil aviation case, the most important one. I do a lot of work in the commercial procurement and sales area, and tenders are a really, really big thing. And you need to know how tenders work, just in the real world. That's very important, and it's just basically what we're talking about here. Okay? Now, let's talk to a completely new topic. Now, it's about offers distinguished from requests for information. Okay, I offer you my house for $1 million. Okay, well, what about if I said to someone, look, if you're interested in selling your house, how much will you sell it for? And the person says, $1 million. Oh, sold. No. I was just responding to your question. So you're going to be a little bit careful to distinguish an offer and request for information. And that's the Harvey and Facey case, where there were indeed two questions, and the person was responding to the second question. So just be a little bit careful the way you ask your questions there. See, requests for information are just that. They're not an offer, they're not an acceptance, they're not a counter offer. They don't affect things. It's just a request for information. All right, so now let's go to the page 17, option contracts. Look, many years ago I read Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal. And I'm pretty sure what I'm going to give you now are the facts from one of the case studies in the book. He came from a moderately wealthy family. The father was in construction. And Trump was a little bit entrepreneurial. And there was some railway land in Manhattan disused. And they wanted, I'm making this up, $10 million. So what he said, look, I'll give you 100,000. You hold it for 3 months from me. If I come with the balance, which is 9,900,000, you give it to me. But if I don't turn up, you keep the 100 big ones. Okay, that's basically what he said. The entrepreneur in him went out and sold the blocks already, and so I'm making this up. He sold for $30 million. So he made a quick $20 million. But see, he made two contracts, one to hold it open, and the second one at a fixed price. And the leading case there is an Australian case, Goldsborough, Moore and Quinn. So you can have a look at that. But option contracts are rather important. Let me use the different words again. I'm interested in buying your house. And I say to you, look, can you hold it open till noon on Saturday? And if it's interstate, you're going to be a little bit careful. You make sure which state we're talking about, you know. And the person says, yeah, that's okay. You go to the bank, get your loan, and you go back and say, I got the money. Sorry, sport, sold it already. I can't do anything about that. And that's why you have options. Because if they sell it to someone else, bang, you can sue them for breach of contract. Those issues we'll talk about later in the semester. All right, so that's option contracts. Now we're going to part 4, which is termination of an offer. And so I make an offer to you. How can we kill it off? What happens? You know, there are a number of ways that can be terminated, which is stopped. The first way is withdrawal of revocation, 4.1. 4.2, counteroffer. 4.3, expiry of time. 4.4, expiry of a condition. 4.5, death of a party. So let's start with 4.1, withdrawal or revocation. Now, the rule there is that an offeror, which is me, I'm making an offer, may simply withdraw. I can say, look, I'm sorry, I'm taking it back. Withdraw my offer at any time prior to being accepted. An offer which has been withdrawn or revoked can no longer be accepted. It's dead, kaput, dead. A withdrawal or revocation of an offer, however, does not become effective until it's actually communicated. I have to communicate it to you. However, once they learn of the offer has been withdrawn, even if they learn by indirectly, they are no longer entitled to accept the offer. They know the offer is effectively no longer on the table or dead. The case there is Byrne and Van Tienhoven. We've also got the Dickinson and Dodds cases there. Just finally, just a story. My wife and I were looking for a house. We wanted something a little bit bigger. And as the estate agent drove off with the signed contract in her hand, basically it was an offer. Putting an offer with a check attached to it. My wife looked at me and I looked at her and I said, I don't want this property. And she said, I don't want this property. Basically, it shows you how silly we are. We were talked into it by the estate agent. So we didn't want to continue with it. So I then had to chase the estate agent down to withdraw the offer. Thankfully, we were able to contact the estate agent before the estate agent took it to the vendor to get a signature on the document. We'll learn later on there are some contracts, or most contracts can be verbal, but some contracts have to be in writing. Land, due to the significance of land and the large amount of fraud which can occur with land, now has to be in writing, or a note or memorandum to affect that. So we were able to get out of it. However, interesting, had the estate agent been unscrupulous and heard my mobile phone message, what he or she could have done is taken the contract straight to the vendor, got a signature on it, and then they just said, oh, you know, I did an hour ago prior to receiving the revocation. Okay, so that's an interesting case. We were fortunate that, and don't do silly things like that because it is silly, and you put yourself at great risk and big bucks too. You know, and my wife and I we were resigned, and if we had to take the house, we'd take it. You know, it wasn't our ideal one, but you know, at least it was something. So it shows you how those things work. Okay, so that's the 4.1 withdrawal of the offer. 4.2 is counter offer. Okay, if I said to you, look, that's a nice piano. How much do you want for it? And you say, 10 grand. And I'll say, sold, but I want the piano stool as well. Offer or counter offer? Suggest to you it's a counter offer. And so therefore, what happens is that I've made the offer now, 10,000. But for that, I get the piano and the piano stool. It's up to the other side to accept or reject. And it goes backwards and forwards like that. And that's a counter offer. And so let's have a look at the rules here. This is on page 19. In contract law terms, this is a process of offer and counter offer. Getting to the end. There are really only two absolute rules. First, there can be one offer between the two parties at any one time. And secondly, by making a counteroffer, a party is rejecting the initial offer and making a new one. So there's one offer, and by making a counteroffer, you're rejecting one. Okay. So continuing, in the case of Hyde and Wrench, the court found that the counteroffer of £950 had extinguished the original offer of £1,000, so Wrench was unable to accept that. So it didn't exist any longer. So be careful, though, to distinguish a counteroffer from a request for information. If a party receives an offer and requests more information about that offer, their action does not extinguish the offer. And again, refer to Stevenson, Jakes, and McLean in that case. Okay, so that's counteroffer. The next one I'd like to talk about the expiry of time. And see, what I got myself in really, really deep trouble with this one. As a 20-year-old, I didn't know these rules. And my mother said to me, son, I'm kicking you out of the house. I said, me, what have I done wrong? She said, no, that time that you grew up, she said, look, let's buy a house. She'll pay the deposit and I pay the rest off. Oh, I thought that's a pretty good deal. I said, okay. So she and I went out and looked for a property, and we found this little shack. Now, this is a long time ago, but we couldn't afford too much. I couldn't afford too much. So it was just a tiny little shack. But it still was a house, and it was a nice little two-bedroom house, little terrace house, so if you're familiar with Melbourne and Sydney, one of those. And put the deposit down and waited. And we thought, oh, well, they're not interested. And very near home, there was another one. So I put a deposit down, and that went through. And a couple of days after the second one, the first one came through. In plain English, I had two. two little cottages, and I had to go to two different banks and tell the whole story. Look, I think I deserved a Nobel Prize for fiction, for literature, for what I had to say to get those two properties. Stressful. I must admit, it worked out well in the long run, but it never meant to be that way. So why am I saying all this? Is to say to you, what I should have done is should have made an offer which expires at a certain period of time. So my offer stays open until Saturday noon. And again, as I mentioned to you before, if it's interstate or international transaction, the date and time, but which date and time? Is it Brisbane time, Melbourne time, Sydney time, Perth time, etc., etc. Okay, so it's pretty important you do that. Now, the other thing is, that's the easy part. The more difficult part is how long does it stay open if there's no specification as to time? Well, it's what use the reasonable person test, the objective test. And you look at the nature of the subject matter by means of which the offer was made and the surrounding circumstances. You know? So if I'm dealing with, say, shipment of milk, how long do you reckon the offer will stay open for? Maximum 6 hours, perhaps? What about a shipment of onions or potatoes? 6 weeks? I don't know. Have to look at what people in the industry say. But you can see what I'm talking to you about is that there is a difference between milk and something which lasts a bit longer, and therefore how do you say that how long is being reasonable? Okay? So do yourself a favour and put an expiry on it. Okay? That's 4.3. Let's go to the next page. 4.4, expiry of a condition. Well, you can just say that if a certain thing doesn't happen, well, there's no contract. So I buy your house and I say, oh, look, you know, $1 million is a bit much. I need to get a $500,000 loan. So I will make you my offer subject to the bank giving me a $500,000 loan. Okay, and if they don't give me the loan, that condition hasn't been met and the contract doesn't go ahead. There's a whole lot of law around that because there's a High Court case of Nean and Jones which says that, you know, I've got to put a reasonable effort in getting it, etc., etc. But that's 4.4. 4.5, death of the party. Generally speaking, and I'll read you the rule here. In short, the offeror or the offeree, offeror is me making offer to you, and the person receiving, if either of those die and the contract has not yet been formed, you are safe to assume that the offer, like any other, like the parties themselves, has been terminated. Okay, so. But once the contract has been created, there are a different set of rules, and we'll talk about them later on. Got to be a little bit careful here because ordinarily you make me an offer and I accept and I die, my estate will be probably required to do whatever it's supposed to be done. You know? I own a famous book or photograph or something like that. I die, my estate will have to give it to you. But there are other circumstances where the contract is terminated, and we'll look at those at a later stage this semester. All right, keeping on going. Now we've finished the offer part. Now the second part is the acceptance of the offer, and first, the acceptance must be unconditional. Okay, so the final offer must be accepted in its entirety without an amendment. This is known as the meeting of the minds. Okay, so I must think the same thing as you. Second, the acceptance must be communicated. So you make me an offer, I accept, I communicate back to you. And there's a couple of areas we'll look at. Silence doesn't mean acceptance. Acceptance can be communicated by conduct, postal rule, acceptance rules, instantaneous communication rules, legislation, and parties themselves can choose rules. And the final thing is that the acceptance must be made in reliance on the offer. Okay, a person can't accidentally accept an offer they didn't know. All right, let's have a quick look at some of these things. Meeting of the minds. Look, the case there is integrated computer systems, and you'll know the facts there that they're both working together, and they went into this agreement, regrettably not in writing, semi-agreed price, and make payments. Well, look. To the outside observer, you just got to say, look, it looks pretty much like the minds met. And so the rules here: for an offer to be accepted, the parties must be consensus ad idem. They must be of one mind. The person agreeing to the final offer must be happy to accept all the obligations in the offer. If they are not, if they try to modify or avoid some of them, then they are not accepting the offer. They are in fact making a counter offer. The court laid down a test which is useful for our purposes. The test was whether the conduct of the parties viewed in the light of the surrounding circumstances shows a tacit agreement or understanding. In other words, we call yet again upon our objective test and ask whether a reasonable person would consider that the conduct of the parties indicated they had formed an agreement. So what would the reasonable person looking on consider to have occurred? 5.2, acceptance must be communicated. So you actually got to tell the other party. I can't just sit here. So you've made an offer to me, and I sit here and say, oh yeah, I accept it. I said it to me in my mind, but I don't communicate it. Now, unless you have asked for it not to be communicated, ordinarily I would have to communicate to you. And that's the Powell and Lee case. And the summary there is that once an offer is to be accepted, acceptance must be communicated by the offerer to an authorised person. Okay, and that's the Powell and Lee case. So keeping on going from there, 5.21, silence can't be specified as acceptance. And that's the Feldhaus and Bindley case, the nephew and Horse there. Simply the rule here is acceptance of an offer requires some positive words or actions, which is conduct. The person making an offer cannot simply say, if you say or do nothing, I will assume. Okay, that may be agreed upon between the parties, but ordinarily the general default rule is you can't just simply say or do that. Okay? 5.22, acceptance can be communicated by conduct. And then we've got a couple of cases there. We've got the integrated computer, we've got the Brogden Metropolitan Railway and Carlon Carbolic Smoke Company. Okay, so you can accept by conduct. And I'll give you an example. I'm a tradie, I'm a consultant, whatever, I provide services. You're thinking of using my services. You ask me for a quotation. I send you a quotation with my terms and conditions, and you send me a purchase order in return with your terms and conditions. My terms and conditions, which I sent you, and yours are radically different. Of course they'll be, because I have certain clauses which I want, and there'll be certain clauses I don't put in, and you'll have certain clauses that you want, and the sort of ones which I want you won't put in. So they'll be radically different. So I start work without giving you, without an acceptance. What will happen is that the law on this, subject to any underlying document, the law is that you've sent me an offer, actually indeed it's a counter offer, and I've, by starting work, by just going ahead and starting work, I've accepted by conduct. My conduct has accepted that. Okay? So acceptance by conduct is it happens. Okay. And 5.23, special rules apply for acceptance by postal mail. And you've got the Adams and Linsell case there. The postal acceptance rule is that acceptance is taken to have communicated as soon as the letter expressing acceptance is posted. So just remember this: where and when the contract is made is when you pop it in the box, in the letter box. Okay. Now, where is really, could be really critical, is I posted in Melbourne to somewhere in Brisbane. Okay. Under the postal rule, it is made when and where it went into the box. So it's the contract was made in Melbourne, so we could. There may be a situation where we may need to use Victorian law. Okay. Now it's when. Now it might have taken a week or two to get the order in. It doesn't matter. Let's say I posted it on the 30th of June. Next day was received, or 2 days later was received on the 2nd of July. Now there might be a capital gains tax situation. Capital gains tax. There are different rules. That depends. It goes into different tax years. So if it's this tax year or next year, so that's really can be very important. And then we have Henthorne and Fraser and Howell securities. They're the relevant cases there. Now, I want to distinguish non-instantaneous communications like post, where the rule is that the contract is created when and where the a letter is put into the letterbox. Distinguish that from instantaneous types of communication, and they include telephone, email, telex, telegram, fax, text, and things like that. They're instantaneous. Okay. Now this is all subject to any legislation, of course. So we're just talking about the common law so far. So the rule there is when and where is actually received. Okay. So the non-instantaneous being the post, when and where you put it in the box, and instantaneous is upon receipt, when and where it was actually received. Okay, which is the more usual situation nowadays because, of course, we still use post, but we don't use it that much. And most of our communications tend to be more instantaneous because we want them quicker, and therefore the general rule is, the default rule is when and where it's actually been received. So continuing on there, 524 on page 28, different rules apply for instantaneous communication. I just mentioned that. Legislation. So law always lags a little bit behind. As something happens, lawyers have to think about it. Parliament comes in and tries to assist where necessary, to assist disadvantaged people. And legislation is both in the state and Commonwealth. They're very similar. In other words, if an email address has been nominated, then you don't need to concern yourself with whether the other party actually knows the email is there. So if I give you my email address and you've accepted, therefore, you don't need to ask any more questions instantly. But if I just give you my website address and you have to find something out of it, or better still, it says here, however, if an email address has not been nominated, you will need to bring the communication to their attention by some other means. It doesn't stop you from ringing up and making note of it, sending a text, sending one of these other methods, or actually going and knocking on the door and telling them yourself. All right, 5.26, the parties can change most rules to suit themselves. I remember when I was doing a lot of work before, I would send a contract to a person in relation to the professional arrangement we had, because I was working as a business consultant. And I said acceptance will only acceptance is only what did I say? It's only deemed to have occurred when your letter of acceptance is received in my office. It was a little bit different to that, but what I was trying to do is I didn't want them to pop it in the mail and be bound by something I wasn't familiar with. I actually had to receive it. So therefore what I did is, as per 5.26, the parties can change most rules to save themselves. And that's what I did. All right, and you've got two cases, the Holwell and Noonan cases. The last one, 5.3, acceptance must be made in reliance to the offer. You would have done this reading on Crown and Clark. Clark was basically trying to save his skin, and he wasn't thinking of the reward. And in essence, the High Court of Australia in 1927 said, no, you're not going to get the money. The summary, 2/3 away from the page. Looking at it another way, there can hardly be a meeting of the minds. Parties can hardly be consensus, even if one of the parties does not even know the other offer exists. So the rule is that in order to be effective, acceptance must be made in reliance on the offer and the relevant authority. That's ground points. All right, and so let's now go to the tutorial problems. Pond's Cosmetic Company. They said a lot of things. Now, I remember, I don't remember how long ago it was. It could be 15, 20 years ago. But I used to watch these ads on TV, you know, and you have this laboratory which looks like a 10-star hotel, you know, really nice, overlooking the Swiss mountains and beautiful glass and pot plants and really swanky, and all these totally gorgeous people walking around with you know, their white jackets on, you know, supposedly scientists, and telling you all your stories about, you know, if you want to look a little bit 10 years younger, just smear the stuff on your face, etc., etc. And, you know, we all thought, you know, this is all a bit far-fetched. So I remember that, and I was just looking at a few things I jotted down here. Where is this place located? Is it really in the Swiss Alps, or is it there's photographs stuck to the windows, you know, looking like that? Can you get a degree, you know, education with this Pond's Institute? What kind of research is conducted at the Pons Institute? What kind of methodology do they use at the Institute? Can the public obtain a copy of the results of the research? I highly doubt all this stuff. You know? Look, as time has passed, I think there's a tendency to become more and more strict with this sort of stuff. See, this is a borderline case. It's hard to distinguish. My gut feel is that it's tough now, particularly nowadays where everything's so strict. Because what would a reasonable person say? What did I write here? What would a reasonable person in the position of the consumer understand the offer to be? And I just quoted the case, Manufacturers Mutual and Boardman's case. Would a normal person understand that a specific statement in advertising was a puff, or would they genuinely expect it to be able to believe information given? And I think nowadays we're becoming more and more strict with advertising, and we've got legislation about that. So, but I think just in general, it's people more educated and less likely to take this stuff, and more likely to see it as a puff. You know? So I reckon it's, and maybe a generation ago we're a bit more lenient and a little bit less educated and more happy to accept this. I do remember reading, and I've forgotten, it was one of the famous Italian actresses. She was doing some cosmetics, may have even been for Pons Institute, may have been. And she said that she was, I think, in her 50s at the time. She said that they took my photograph and they made me look like, 20 years younger. And they, did all sorts of airbrushed it and stuff like that. She said she couldn't even recognise herself. And that's the sort of thing which happens in advertising. Okay, let's go to the second question. That's the question of Graham and Jill. Okay, and this is a bit of a headache, this question. You've got to be really careful with this. But let me just say this to you. If you had this in an examination and you didn't get it right, but you did follow the logical steps, you'd still do reasonably well, okay, depending on how you respond. Let me just read out what I've got here. Graham makes an invitation to treat in the goods in the window. I think it's an invitation to treat in the goods in the window. She makes an offer, and before, after she made the offer, he makes a statement. I can give you 4 statements, four ties. This could either be provides further information or a counter offer. And so you got to think that thing through. Is it further information or making counteroffer? Counteroffer changes the nature of the offer. I've elected to go with provides further information. Could be wrong there, but provides further information. So therefore, he's making the offer. Sorry, with further information that doesn't change the offer, or she's still making the offer. And if he makes a counteroffer, it's up for her to come back. In any event, she has to come back. She has come back and says, listen, I'll just take 2, thanks. And what does he say? Okay, offer and acceptance, contract, right? So therefore, I believe there's a contract made there. He says, look, if you want the other 2, you've got to get back to him by noon. So I am suggesting he's making an offer there. Then at 10:30, he's made the sale of tyres 3 and 4. He wants to revoke the offer. So what he does is, not sensibly, I think he should have rung her up, but he probably didn't want to get into an argument. So he sends a text regarding that tyres 3 and 4 have been sold. He wants to revoke it. What's the rule regarding revocation? It's only effective upon communication, okay, which is when she actually received the message. Okay. Now, as you know, it was delayed. In the interim, she phones him and leaves a message on the answering machine that she wants 4 tyres. That was an instantaneous communication. And there's no legislation on this. We use the common law, and her acceptance is effective upon receipt by the technology at Graham's end. Therefore, the contract is made. Then the revocation is received. Okay, so I reckon there's a contract there. So let's have a look. We've been asked a couple of questions. Is there a contract between them? I'd say yes for 4 tyres, 2 plus 2. Who made the offer and who made the acceptance? I reckon she made the offer and he accepts it. Do the facts suggest an invitation to treat? Yes, almost in the first line there. How many tyres? 4 tyres. Has the revocation been effective? No. All right. So we are in week 5 this week. I hope it all goes well with you. And what I'll do is this coming Thursday night, I will give you another class, and I hope things go well with you, and hope technology works well. Those of you just tuned in without seeing the front of this, I was interstate and had some difficulty with the technology, and at least I've just redone this for you, so you've got a feel of what we covered in the tutorial, which is virtually the same as this, except you don't see other people talking. All right, wish you all the best. Take it easy. See you. Bye-bye.